Hey everyone, welcome to class. Go ahead and settle in. Today, we're diving into an absolutely massive, defining moment in human history. We're talking about a moment where just a single spark literally ignited a global catastrophe, tearing down entire empires and completely rewriting the map of the world. Today's explainer is all about the Great War.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How did one single gunshot change the entire world forever? Now I know, that sounds kind of like an exaggeration, right? Like how could one bullet do all that? But history is often balanced right on a knife's edge, and today we're going to look really closely at how a hyper-localized incident in just one city rapidly unspooled into the absolute deadliest conflict the Earth had ever seen up to that point.
So, here's our syllabus for today's lesson. We'll start with one single gunshot, move into the chain reaction that followed, examine the terrifying nightmare of the battlefield, look at a changed course, and finally, uncover the shadows of another war.
All right, Section 1, one single gunshot, or the spark in Sarajevo. Let's step back in time together to the summer of 1914.
Picture this. The date is June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is visiting Sarajevo. Now you gotta understand, this wasn't just some simple tragedy, it was this bizarre, almost unbelievable collision of pure chance and radical intent. There was a secret society known as the Black Hand, and they wanted to break Austria-Hungary's provinces off to form a unified Yugoslavia. So they deployed assassins all along the Archduke's parade route. And get this, one of them, a young guy named Gavrilo Princip, literally just happened to be standing outside Schiller's Delicatessen when the Archduke's driver made a fatal wrong turn. That wrong turn stalled the car right in front of Princip. 2 shots rang out. That was it. That was the specific, localized political conflict, the micro-catalyst, just one single event aimed at one specific political figure, but it was the exact spark needed to push all of humanity right to the brink.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, the chain reaction, as Europe mobilizes. Because, as you'll see, this spark absolutely did not stay contained to the streets of Sarajevo.
You see, the gunshot was the spark, but the powder keg? Oh, that had been building for decades. Across Europe, powerful nations were locked into this tangled, messy web of secret alliances. On one side, you had the Triple Entente, that's Britain, France, and Russia, and on the other side stood the Central Powers, led by Germany and Austria-Hungary. Now, long before that fateful day in Sarajevo, these empires had been locked in a massive arms race, building up unprecedented standing armies and stockpiling some seriously deadly weapons. Basically, Europe was standing in a room soaked in gasoline, just waiting for someone to light a match.
So the really crucial point here is that this wasn't just an isolated tragedy. It was a devastating political chain reaction, which historians call the July Crisis. When Austria-Hungary issued this basically impossible ultimatum to Serbia in retaliation for the assassination, the dominoes just started falling. Serbia called on its protector, Russia. Russia mobilizes its forces. Well, that triggers Germany to declare war on Russia, which inherently brings in France. And then, when Germany marched its troops through neutral Belgium to reach France, Britain was forced to enter the fray. In literally a matter of mere weeks, this unstoppable momentum of history took over, transforming a regional dispute in the Balkans into a true, full-blown world war.
Let's move to Section 3, the terrifying nightmare, life and death in the trenches. I want us to actually slow down here for a second, because the true human cost of this conflict is, well, it's honestly hard to genuinely comprehend.
For the soldiers out there on the front lines, this was an agonizing daily reality. They were living deep in these muddy, waterlogged trenches that eventually stretched all the way from the Swiss border to the North Sea. It was this visceral, sensory horror that just never stopped. Soldiers were battling not just the enemy, but nature itself. They suffered from debilitating trench foot, rampant disease, and these unrelenting, horrifying infestations of rats. And above all of that was the psychological toll. The days-long, deafening artillery bombardments actually introduced a brand new medical condition to the world, shell shock. The constant, inescapable shadow of death hovered over literally every single waking moment.
What made it so deadly was that traditional 19th century military tactics were crashing headfirst into 20th century technology. Command strategies frequently involved just marching men in straight lines across no man's land directly into the mechanical slaughter of the Maxim machine gun. We're talking about a weapon capable of firing hundreds of rounds a minute, tearing through thousands of men in an instant. And perhaps even more terrifying, the introduction of chemical warfare. At places like Ypres, heavy, suffocating clouds of chlorine and mustard gas literally rolled across the battlefield. These were weapons that brutally burned soldiers' lungs and blinded them forever. The fields of Europe were turned into absolute slaughterhouses.
But it is absolutely crucial for our class to remember that this nightmare extended way beyond the muddy trenches. This was the dawn of total war. Entire economies were completely repurposed for destruction. Back on the home front, civilian populations faced severe rationing and outright starvation. Like, you had Germany's infamous turnip winter. Women entered munitions factories in massive numbers just to keep the war machine grinding along. Entire cities were reduced to crumbling, smoking ruins, and millions of families were shattered, forever losing their fathers, their sons, and their brothers.
Which brings us to Section 4, a changed course, the turning point. Because after years of a grinding, brutal stalemate, a monumental shift finally occurs.
Up until this point, the timeline progressed agonizingly slowly. The war began in 1914, and for years, neither side could completely break the deadlock. But the turning point came in 1917, when the United States officially entered the conflict. And this brilliantly illustrates how a few key events can shift the balance of power. Why did the US jump in? Well, it definitely wasn't unprovoked. Germany resumed its policy of unrestricted submarine warfare, which, remember, had previously sunk the civilian liner Lusitania. Couple that with the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, this crazy secret message where Germany actually proposed a military alliance with Mexico against the US, and America was pushed to declare war. This entry brought fresh troops and vast industrial might, changing the course of history forever. It provided the final push they needed, and by late 1918, the war finally came to an end.
20 million. I want us to just pause for a second and let the staggering weight of that number sink in. More than 20 million people left dead. That's both military and civilian, with another 21 million horribly wounded. The guns had finally fallen silent, sure, but the cost was almost unbearable for the human race to process. An entire generation was effectively wiped out.
And that brings us to our final topic today, Section 5, Shadows of Another War, the Unresolved Aftermath. Because the peace that was signed in 1918, well, as history shows us, it wasn't really peace at all. I want to read this powerful observation directly from our source material for this explainer. But the scars of the war never disappeared, and the anger left behind would soon lead the world toward an even darker disaster. You see, the physical fighting stopped, yes, but the bitter anger remained deeply, deeply rooted. The Treaty of Versailles severely punished Germany. It imposed crushing financial reparations, stripped away their territory, and forced them to accept full blame for the whole war. To the defeated nations, this didn't feel like peace, not even close. It felt like a humiliating temporary armistice.
So we're left with this really stark contrast. On one side, 1918 is celebrated as the end of World War I. But on the other side, the grim reality is that this supposed end was simply a simmering waiting period. The crippling economic devastation and the unresolved scars of Versailles directly paved the way for radical ideologies and fascism to take root. This toxic environment essentially guaranteed that a second, even darker disaster was historically inevitable.
Which leaves us with this final, honestly chilling thought to close out today's lesson. If the anger never disappeared, and the nations involved merely used the peace to breed radicalism and rebuild their armies for an even deadlier conflict, did the First World War ever truly end? Or was it all just one continuous, terrifying chain reaction? Think about that as we wrap up today's class. I'll see you all next time as we continue to unpack the fascinating shadows of history.